Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I am just delighted to welcome Emily King back to the podcast. Emily, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabrielle.
I am so happy because I have such a fond recollection of our first conversation, which the listeners can find in the podcast menu. But you're back for a very special reason. And actually, the day this will drop is a very special day. Do you want to say why?
Yeah, so my first book comes out on August 25th. So if you're listening to this when this podcast dropped, it is now available for you to purchase, download, all the things, however you read books. And it is called The Neurodivergent Learner.
So before we get into why you wrote the book, what's in the book, all of that, what qualifies you to write a book called The Neurodivergent Learner, Emily King?
Oh my goodness. So I will go all the way back to letting you know that I started my career as a school psychologist. That is what my actual doctorate is in, school psychology, and worked in Houston, Texas, in public schools, pre-K through 12, all ages, before returning home to North Carolina, where I am from and family is here. And we had a child by then. And, you want to be close to everybody. And then when I returned to North Carolina, I realized that I wanted to be in private practice kind of against my own will because I'm such a school person. But by that time, I wanted to collaborate. I wanted to work with private providers. I wanted to work with parents. I wanted to work with teachers. And I could, in our state, in North Carolina, school psychologists tend to only do testing. And so I had already expanded my passion for these kids and how complex they are, and I wanted to do more than just testing. So that was kind of my framework. And then I became a mother, and I became a psychologist in private practice that gave me the breadth to really expand my training to floor time training, which I would often incorporate with young children, who most of whom were autistic, but some with, young, big emotions, ADHD children, that I would see in my practice. And then over the years, just such a collaboration with parents and teachers, and realizing that I wanted to go upstream, is what I call it, to help the parents and teachers prevent so much of the anxiety that I was seeing in my therapy playroom. And then as a parent, I also have two neurodivergent boys who are now 13 and 18. Can't believe I have a legal adult. I know. And so that journey with them, they are both extremely different from each other, two extremely different flavors of neurodivergence. I've been on all sides of the IEP and 504 table, and I've walked with so many families that have taught me so many things, the kids, the teachers, the parents. And I always wanted a resource to give a family that was not only new to this journey, but also expanded the idea of success, because that is the first feeling I know as a parent that overwhelms you, is like, well, what now? What can my child do? What is going to be possible? And in the book, you'll get a sense for this overarching feeling of redefining success and throwing chronological timeframes out the window and following your child's developmental path. And yes, this book is about learning, and the first half of it is strongly leans into what do we do about school for our kids, right? But then the back half of it really talks mostly about learning outside of school and how we can help our kids expand their knowledge and their experiences in other places, because as we all know, school is hard for a lot of our kids. And so I wanted it to be a very hopeful book, but also it's there's a lot of science in there. It's loaded with strategies and stories. I definitely wanted parents to not feel alone, and I hope that they come away from this book feeling like they're a part of a bigger village, as we say, that they may not know yet.
Ooh, and I got all of that reading it. It's so, number one, it's very well written and very accessible. So I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into some of the principles. You say the last chapter of the book says, the title is Your Child's Path is the Right Path. It's a very short chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is number one, to highlight it, because the whole book is really about um, coming into alignment. I don't want to say coming to acceptance, but coming into alignment with your child to help them be themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's really something about, our culture and how we live in this like hustle and this capitalism and this structure of traditional everything, traditional medicine, traditional schools. And like, yes, there are parts of all of this that are positive and negative, but anyone who is raising a neurodivergent child, especially a kid who speaks the truth, like if you have an autistic child that calls you out on stuff, or you have a sensory sensitive kid that like there is no sucking it up, they are going to be sensitive to that. We have to adapt. The system around them has to adapt. And of all the children on the planet, in my opinion, neurodivergent children are holding up a mirror saying, like, you got to just follow me. I know what I need. I may not be able to express what I need, but when there's behavior, when there's overwhelm, when something's not working, alignment is the word. It's not aligned, and we need to slow down and we need to look around and notice what is working and just recalibrate what we are doing here, right? To help move our kids forward a little bit at a time. And absolutely, that sometimes is going to go along with the pace of school, and sometimes it is not going to go along with the pace of school because our system is designed for the masses, and these kids are extremely complex and unique.
Yeah. Okay. I want to come to that a little bit here, because the families that you're writing this book for, and the educators for that matter, are dealing with, as you say, they are not dealing with the masses. They are dealing with some very specific learners. And so just talk about a little bit, and I think you've started already, but like talk about how we interface, how do we put a square peg in a round hole, right? And I think what you're saying is we don't pretend that the peg is not square.
Mm-hmm. So we get a bigger hole.
Yes. Keep going. I love it.
Yeah. Why is the hole round? Yeah. Right. So, and why is it one size? So when we think about just, bird's eye view from a systemic standpoint, our education system, though I'm grateful for it, right? And when I'm talking here about our special education system that we've had in America and in North America and the United States for 50 years, it is modeled after the medical model. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, meaning we diagnose a problem. I mean, this is how I was trained as a school psychologist. We diagnose a problem, and then we design an intervention with the goal of doing away with that problem, right? Well, some of the things that we see in these kids are actually not problems. And so one of my favorite parts of the book, it's actually just a breakout box, is where I go into the difference between, I describe difference versus disability. Because there are many things about neurodivergence, and this is where we got to really listen to neurodivergent voices in terms of how kids describe how I just do things differently. It's not a problem, And over the years, you get a clinical feel working with these kids. You get kind of a mom or parent gut feel of like, this is just something my kid does, whether it's stimming or a movement, a sound they make, it's not a problem unless they're in a room where it's a problem because of the expectations of the room, right? So the room being the round circle. So we have to really think about what is it that is just different, and accepting that, helping kids accept that, helping other adults that don't know our child accept that, and what reaches a threshold, because some things do, that is disabling for a person or for a child that does warrant identification and an intervention or a treatment, whether that's medical or educational intervention. or therapeutic. And so that's kind of a bigger picture of how it is so much more complicated than the traditional. I always like to use orthopedics because that's, to me, that's very black and white and straightforward. My kid breaks their arm. I take them to someone who knows how to fix broken arms, and then that bone heals and we move on with our lives, right? There is usually a pretty standard time frame. There's usually a very standard, like care plan for that. Everyone's pretty familiar with it. Like you see a kid with a cast and you're not like, oh, what's going on with that kid? Like no one says that because we're all very used to that. Everybody's probably had it happen to them or someone that they know.
Yeah.
But when we come to developmental differences, neurodevelopmental differences, it is so much more dynamic and complex than that. Because when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you have a stomach ache, when you are in a room and there's sensory overwhelm, when you're annoyed, any of those factors are possibly going to lower your skills in learning and communication and impulse control. And then all of a sudden you are more disabled than you were when your nervous system was feeling healthy. And so it's a dynamic system that we have to understand through nervous system research and education. And then on top of that, every kid is different. So like, this is why I'm like, teachers, I love you. You're amazing. Like every time I speak to teachers, I'm like, just thank you for being lifelong learners because you probably didn't learn any of this in your teaching program, So
no, and in fact, most of what we learned, besides your like problem-based system, right? Where like, let's find the problem, diagnose it and fix it. What we also learned was that the way we should do that is through behavioral intervention. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole other piece of this, classroom management, if we're just even talking about in the schools where the teachers are like, I did train for this. It doesn't work.
Right. And I will say some of those concepts will work with a neurotypical child.
For some amount of time.
For some amount of time. There is some and this is where I always go back to, like, as an educator, as a parent, you're going to get intermittently reinforced. If we're going to talk about behaviorism, we're going to get, every now and then reinforced that the stickers and the points and all of that might work. And in some instances, short term, they do. Mm-hmm. However, it is so much more complicated than that. Yeah. And I go in, I have a whole chapter on motivation and I go into that in the book. But I think I feel at this crossroads in our field where psychology and education are finally getting it together as like, okay, we're buddies. Like we got to communicate about these things. And educational psychologists and SLPs and OTs and school psychologists have known this. Mm-hmm. But the biggest the hill I will die on, the soapbox I will stand on forever is trying to get all of the teacher education programs and curriculum understanding this so that teachers have this information sooner. And of course, there will always be need for professional development as science uncovers more and more and changes. But I just have such a passion for helping teachers feel equipped and capable with these kids.
Well, and that, first of all, thank you, because, it takes 20 to 30 years if we look at kind of what happens from research to practice. Mm-hmm. And so we do have teachers that are in grad school now who have 20-year-old information. And we also know like the field is changing rapidly. Neuroscience is changing rapidly. What we understand about the brain, about nervous systems, about what is actually happening to us neurologically, neurophysiologically, all that's in rapid flux. And so they need, professionals who are practicing, even recently graduated ones, probably especially them, but need the extra learning that happens because they can't get that in grad school. SLPs are still like learning a behaviorist system in grad school. Why? I don't know. I don't like it. That's a different podcast. I know.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit, because the thing that happens to me, and I'm sure it happens to you, is parents come in and they say, I need some strategies to help my kid. Tell me, we were talking a little bit about this before we hit record, but tell me what you say to those folks and tell me what you put in the book so that people can go and learn more about that.
So I think of strategies like the sprinkles on top. There might be a really great one that we call the cherry on top, but they're multiple. So there's sprinkles. We sprinkle them on top after we have established the foundation of learning for a kid. So this foundation is going to be what we all are pretty familiar with, which is safety, right? So sensory safety, where meaning I feel like I'm not going to get attacked in this room. I feel safe in this space, in this building, and it's relational safety. So these kind of are fluid back and forth because they happen somewhat at the same time. So relational safety and sensory safety. For some kids, the relationships might be more important than the setting. For some, setting might be more important than the relationships. But that safety is so important. And as an aside here, I often will hear teachers say, I have a great relationship with this student, but they still can't do it. And I'm like, okay, so let's keep going and building that foundation. So what we need to look at next is the child's pacing and interest. And again, you'll see in the book that I put these in a certain order, but they're a little bit fluid. It's dynamic. So the child has to be able to keep up or not be bored. So there's this alignment and pacing with learning that comes with either, let's say, the gifted child who is checked out because they have already read to the end of the chapter and they're like, I can't wait on these people who are still at the beginning of the chapter. And so they're doodling, or the child who is has slow processing speed and is far behind. So they're getting flooded with anxiety about being behind. And then their brain just got hijacked with anxiety. So pacing is really important. So if you're like, okay, my child's connected, this child's connected, they feel safe, but something's going too fast or too slow, we adjust that. And that's not, we could call it a strategy, but it's not what I think about as a strategy. That is a foundational support that's systemic. Either the learning is moving too fast or too slow.
I want you to talk about the difference between perceived safety and actual safety. Please.
Yes. So safety is only accurate through the child perceiving it. So, right? So and this is where it gets tricky when a child cannot communicate that. However, as the adults in the room, we have more skills than the child does. We have more nonverbal skills to be able to read a facial expression, to read body posture, to read, fidgeting, anything a child's body is doing that's starting to look dysregulated, that's starting to look like they're, just really uncomfortable, or even that's just a little different. Maybe they're moving really fast and they're usually pretty chill, or maybe they are really sluggish and they're usually upbeat. Those are all indications that a nervous system is getting dysregulated, and they may not be able to communicate. Now, sometimes kids will communicate, and they won't communicate, I'm getting dysregulated. And they won't say, now some have had so much therapy they might, but they won't say, this is starting to overwhelm me. They're not going to say that. They're going to rip up the test. They're going to break a pencil. They're going to kick a chair. All of that is dysregulation. And that is what we have to use our observation skills, our social pragmatic skills to see that and see, okay, this child's not feeling safe. Because anytime the room starts to not feel safe because of a child's behavior, that child first didn't feel safe.
Oh, I love this. Okay, I want to sketch this out because it mirrors something that I say to parents all the time, which is external behavior is number one, the tip of the iceberg, but is an external manifestation of internal chaos. If you see chaos on the outside, there's chaos on the inside. So this is like you're taking this macro to the whole class and saying, if there's chaos in the classroom, there's chaos in the child, right? And so I find that safety piece is really important for adults to understand, because they look at, their neuroceptive system looks around and is like, this is a gorgeous environment. And then they miss the cues of the student, the learner, who is dysregulated because they're not perceiving the safety in the environment.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will add real quick, the flip of this is the people-pleasing perfectionist child who is extremely compliant, never a safety issue to the classroom, to anyone around them, actually gets lots of feedback for being quote unquote good. And this is the child that I actually am more concerned about than the kid kicking things, because this child is holding in this dysregulation and it is dysregulating their physical body. Whereas the kid who kicked something got that energy out. And now I'm not saying that kicking is good and safe. However, they did expel that energy and they're not keeping it in. So we have to also look for the child who is wound up tight or who starts to become tearful out of nowhere because they've been holding it together, and then the tears come out at a time that was unexpected to the adult. Whenever I do presentations, I have this list of behaviors that are hard to miss, like real obvious aggression, verbal arguing, all this stuff, very, very hard to miss those. And then easy to miss, which is, our compliant, people-pleasing perfectionists that often have anxiety, often are very bright, sometimes are twice exceptional, or are our rule followers who find safety in the rules. And that child, think about learning in a group and monitoring all of the choices of the people around you and how multiple people at multiple times of day are not doing things the quote unquote correct way, and how stressful that would be. And the child may never say that out loud if we don't really get to know. This is often the child who looks great at school and falls apart at home.
Yeah. And then parents are coming to school saying they're a disaster. And the school says, what do you mean? We have no idea that that's happening. And somehow, this is what kills me actually, somehow the discrepancy between the two environments is meant to delegitimize that there's a problem. And yet the fact that there is such a discrepancy is in fact the symptom that there is the problem. Like that's literally what is pointing to the idea that there's a problem here.
Yeah. Right? And I make the point in the book that, getting back to our foundation with the strategies on top, let's take that example. The strategies are the last thing we add, like the relationships are solid. The sensory is maybe doable during the day. The pacing, seems okay. The child is interested, but something's still not working. They're great at school and then they fall apart at home. So this is where I want to say to teachers and parents, if there is a problem in any setting, it's everyone's problem until we figure it out. And that doesn't mean a teacher needs to come into the home or the parent needs to come into the classroom. It means we've got to talk about, why is this child running out of steam at a certain time of day, and what does that look like? What does this skill look like at home versus at school? That collaboration to figure it out. The strategy, for instance, that could come out of that would be, okay, so if this child's skill on math, for instance, is independent in the classroom at 1:30 in the afternoon, but is not independent at 4:30 in the afternoon, they're a puddle on the floor, we need to talk about, is there a strategy we need for that? Or is that actually what we need to be doing? If the teacher's able to say, they're getting enough math practice at 1:30, we can just not send this part home. That's the strategy.
That is literally the strategy. And this is where I find that your book, I hope, will be helpful to so many parents, because essentially what you're doing is, and nobody needs a permission slip from somebody else. We can give ourselves permission slips, but this book is a giant permission slip to follow your child's signals, to be the detective, and to advocate for them in a collaborative way. One of the things that you're really good at is seeing all of the different sides of this equation on behalf of the child and saying, you even have sample scripts in the book for how to talk to school, how to talk to your kid about what you said to school, for example. Mm-hmm. and to really create a very coherent environment, even across different environments for this neurodivergent learner. And so I love you're there to like, hey, you can do this a different way. And let me show you how this can work. That part I just adore.
Oh, I'm so glad that resonated because this is just how my brain works because of my experience, in clinical work with the child, as a parent on, advocating, and then also having worked as a school psychologist, being in so many meetings from different standpoints. It's easy for everyone to feel defensive. I get it. I felt defensive, right? But that stalls everything. And so we just have, I mean, we say it all the time when we're talking about kids and play, but we have to stay curious as adults of when something is not happening across settings. We have to not dismiss it as, oh, it's not a problem because it's not happening across settings. Now, that's something that was drilled into our heads, right? As clinicians, it's in the DSM for ADHD that it has to be happening across settings to be diagnosed. And so, okay, well, we've got more settings than just school and home. We've got tutors and we have, extracurriculars and we have, different activities in church communities. Like there are lots of places our kids go. And so once we really start thinking about how our kid looks in these different settings and these different systems, what is working and why is it working? And how can we bring that to the place that's not working? Or how can we adjust expectations if the child developmentally isn't there yet? And when I say that, I mean, it's so specific. It could be your child's independently ready to do that math at school, but not at home. Or they could do it in the morning on Saturday, but not in the morning on Wednesday. I mean, it gets that finite, and noticing our kids' stamina and motivation. And these are all things this is why Debbie Reber calls this advanced parenting. I lived this, this is, it's extra. This is extra, right? However, it will get us to the point where we can not all be so overwhelmed, and our kid is not overwhelmed.
Well, and this is the really interesting, opportunity. And again, an interesting opportunity is probably an opportunity happening to someone else. So we can just acknowledge, right, that yes, it's hard. And also these kids that we're talking about, these neurodivergent students, kiddos, they are really, like you said, holding up a mirror to all of this unresolved whatever that we know, we have been knowing that it doesn't work. And we just kind of stuffed it down because we could, right? There's plenty of stuff in my educational history that I wish were different, but I had the bandwidth or the capacity or the support to handle it, right? These kids don't.
Right.
And they show us that every day. And if we continue to come at them and be like, no, fit in this hole, no, fit in this hole, well, then we've got either a lifetime of pain, probably a lifetime of pain and suffering, and then just like a loop that who wants to stay there?
Yeah. Well, what's heartbreaking to me and why I do this work and get out of bed every morning to do this work is we run the risk of damaging their lifelong love of learning. And I work with so many kids who have school trauma or have had something happen where they feel so burned out at school. We really have to repair that. There are times where, yes, we want to get them eventually back into a learning environment, but that's not the immediate goal. For me, the immediate goal is for them not to just write off learning for the rest of their life, because that's how we connect with each other, through stories. That's how we gain independence, through math skills. That's how in cooking and, being able to just learn anything, not just academics.
Well, and that's a really interesting lens to be looking through, because I do think so often parents are like, no, he has to learn this math this way. It's like, why? And because when we have these neurodivergent learners, we get to really ask why. Like, why do I think that's true? Why do I think it's true? My kid has to fill in the blank, do any of it.
Or the kids ask. I mean, how
Yeah.
common is it for a kid to say, "Why do I have to show my work? If I get the answer, why do I have to show my work?" The best answer I've tried to come up with is that I don't know if they buy it at all, but it is helpful for a teacher to see how a kid thought through the problem. Sometimes that works,
Yeah.
but sometimes they're like, well, isn't it good enough that I just know the answer? Because they can calculate it in their head. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I mean, I think it's good enough, but I'm not your teacher.
Kinda. Yeah. No, I had this whole, yes, agreed. Um, Emily, what do you hope that what's your hope for what people take from the book?
Yeah, I hope that parents who are new to this journey or who are feeling stuck. Like you might not be new to the journey, but you might be feeling stuck. And again, the book is predominantly for kind of preschool age up through early middle school. I couldn't get it all in one book. I hope that there will be a sequel for teens and young adults. However, if you're in that age range of parenting, but again, if you have an older child, it's definitely going to be relevant too. You'll just interpret for your own kid as we do. But I hope that there's that hopeful feeling of, okay, school is not the only way to learn. And here is how we handle it while we're here. And this is how we can collaborate with teachers. I want parents to challenge the systems. Why do we have so much testing? Why do we do homework? I talk about research in the book about homework and testing. You know, there are many different ways that our kids use their memories to learn. So why do we test in these ways and only these ways? And then just that bigger idea of acceptance socially as well. And so I spend a good bit of time talking about learning through extracurriculars, which indirectly kind of includes, you know, traveling with your child and just those interests that they all have outside of learning. Because we can get kind of stuck feeling like, okay, if school is overwhelming for my child, how am I going to get this through that? And how are they going to learn? Oh, there's so many more ways to learn outside a classroom. And I think this book could resonate with some homeschool parents, but I also work with lots of parents who will say, I can't homeschool. I
Mhm.
have to work. I'm not built for it. Like I'm not built for it. I totally get that.
Me
And
neither.
so there are some kids that struggle with the size of school buildings, that struggle with there are all these logistics of school that are hard. So I just hope it gives parents lots and lots of ideas to start troubleshooting things with their kids' teams, both in school and outside of school, and therapeutic teams, just to know that there's no one answer for this. And we have to just slow down and observe our kids and figure out when they are smiling, when there's joy, that back and forth of just staying curious with what they need next.
Oh, I love it. Okay. If people want to buy the book, tell us what they do. And if people want to find out more about your work, tell us also what they should do.
Yeah, so you can go to learnwithdremily.com/book and all the links are there for the book. That's also my website, so you can look around there. But I also do professional development and mostly in person because I love to be in person with teachers. And then all of my parent workshops are online just because we're parents and we need to be walking or doing laundry or listening, all those types of things. So I have a whole library of parent workshops on Substack, and also the blog is there that is always available.
Fantastic. Dr. Emily King, what a pleasure. And congratulations on your first book.
Thank you so much.